Today's video is brought to you by our friends over at Brilliant, ladies and gentlemen. Have you ever wondered, whoa, how do I get good at math, data science, computer science? Oh boy, these are complicated topics, and chances are if you crack open a book, you may just fall asleep. So Brilliant is over here to get a fun, intuitive, and incredibly interactive way for you to actually jump down and learn these complex topics with ease, something catered specifically to you. Ladies and gentlemen, new lessons added every single month. They create the actual pace for you. They ask you a few questions, figure out your skill level, and even if you're an absolute beginner all the way to somebody that is a complete expert, chances are you will learn something new. So for instance, one course that's interesting me is actually understanding data science. Because as a YouTuber, understanding trends and how the data in the YouTube analytics interacts with each other helps us figure out what kind of content works best. But let's say that you're somebody that's just really busy, or again, you want to advance your career, or you just need an incredibly effective way to learn. Brilliant is absolutely great for you. Now, if you want to get started free for 30 days and start an educational journey, that's all the way down there. You can use our special link in the description below. And of course, the first 200 people using that link get a 20% annual plan by visiting that URL, ladies and gentlemen. That is brilliant.org/SOG. Please go check it out if this interests you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get on with the video. Hello guys and gals, me Emudeck, and I'll be honest, I think I'm breaking the law, to be real with you. Now, emulators are a huge thing for me to discuss. I'm a big game preservationist guy. I love talking about preserving games like Breath of the Wild for 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years. I want people to play good games down the road. And if you're somebody that says, old man, how could you play boring old games? Just buy the new stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, gaming is timeless, and there's a lot of games from back in the day that tons of people load up now and absolutely enjoy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, emulating is pretty much how I do most of my gaming, especially these days. There's a lot of games I missed growing up from the PlayStation 2, the GameCube era, heck, even from the Wii 360, PlayStation 3 era. And now there's no better time but to go back, relax, load them up on the Steam Deck, and call it a day. But the more and more that I've been emulating, the more I've actually been researching into the legality surrounding emulation as well. Because I've been confidently saying emulators are very legal. But what about the games that we end up dumping? I think I've been breaking the law by dumping games. But let's get into the start of it. So I bought the Steam Deck OLED from Valve, and it is a very, very good upgrade over the original Steam Deck, which I already had no issues with. For anybody that's wondering, the Steam Deck is Valve's hardware that they've released. Think of it like a handheld gaming PC. You've got multiple devices on the market from GPD, Aya, you've got Asus, and then you've also got Lenovo recently with a straight-up Switch-like handheld gaming PC. But Valve is the one that, in my opinion, does it the best. For instance, the Steam Deck OLED already has a punchier screen, an OLED screen. Now, if you know that, I love me the OLEDs. I got the PlayStation Vita. This thing is god tier. I am one of the ardent thousands of people who support this to its dying breath. And of course, the Switch OLED is a pretty decent option. You know, a lot of games look great with an OLED. You can play Super Mario Wonder and just say, God damn. The OLED adds that extra color pop. Now, of course, this is Valve's response to the actual OLED Switch, which again, this is a more vibrant screen. They've got HDR support, so games like Cyberpunk look amazing when they've got HDR enabled. You've also got games like Batman Arkham Knight, which absolutely pop compared to the original Steam Deck. And of course, beyond the screen just being better, you've also got, thinner bezels, so it really feels like the screen is a little bigger. The system is also lighter, and of course, the battery has been increased. If you remember the original Steam Deck, running games like Cyberpunk would give you maybe like an hour, 20 minutes of game time. With this, I've noticed an average of some of the heaviest games giving me an extra hour of game time, which again is plenty enough for me. Look, if I can play Cyberpunk for like 2 hours on a device like this with HDR, sure, the graphics aren't the greatest, but it's literally all I want. This is one of the best gaming devices, period. And the best part about the Steam Deck is it can be as simple as you want, or it can be as convoluted and complex as you want. So if you want to treat this like a standard gaming console and just install games from Steam and call it a day, you can. But I think I speak for most people when they buy something like the Steam Deck, they're emulating on it. Even Valve's own promotional material once showed them running the Yuzu emulator. Not running, But sorry, it was sitting there on the home screen. Somebody at Valve really liked playing Switch games on their hardware, and it shows. One of the most emulated systems on this device right now, according to certain surveys from Overkill, found that Steam Deck guys and gals love the PlayStation 2. And why do they love the PlayStation 2? So they can play Silent Hill 2 on that juicy OLED anywhere they go. Now, to understand, ladies and gentlemen, the laws surrounding emulation have been relatively clear-cut when it comes to the programs themselves. So if we go back in time to obviously one of the most famous cases, Bleem, where Sony actually ended up suing one of the commercial companies, Bleem, a proprietary emulator released back in 1999, because at the time, these people were basically allowing anybody to play actual PS1 games on the PC. So back in the day, Sony would advertise that you could play Ridge Racer, or I guess better examples would be Gran Turismo, which was like a showstopper. Back then, Gran Turismo looked like Crysis for some people. And honestly, there's no shock. Some people thought video game graphics couldn't even get better. But of course, with Bleem and emulator software in general, they would proudly and loudly advertise that their system could get 3 times higher resolutions, realistic fire effects if you added advanced filtering, and of course, lightning-fast load times. So you can imagine Sony would probably be pissing and shitting themselves when they realized, wow, these guys are just selling a piece of software and nobody's going to be buying our hardware. So of course, lawsuits were filed, mistakes were made, and Sony had effectively laid precedent for gamers just basically being allowed to emulate since then. According to the lawsuit, Sony filed them over copyright. Sony actually accused Bleem of engaging in unfair competition by letting the PlayStation BIOS be used on a personal computer. But of course, the judge restricted that notion. They actually issued a protective order, which is considered the protection of David from Goliath. Sony had a second copyright allegation in regards to them using screenshots of Gran Turismo, Ridge Racer, so on and so forth, comparing how it looked natively resolution-wise on the PS1 to how you could up the resolution by 3 times and get rid of all the jaggies and make your games look sharp as fuck. Now, of course, this is not something that's new necessarily. Even to this day, there's been plenty of lawsuits, not lawsuits, but at least DMCA takedowns of advertising in regards for certain emulators. Back when Persona 5 dropped and RPCS3 was basically the poster child for playing Persona 5 on the PC, Sega wasn't taking that too kindly. And it's ever since then that Persona 5 is pretty much officially unattached from that project. Not to say that you can't play Persona 5 on RPCS3, but at this point, the game's already out on Steam, so why even bother? Now, in regards to any of this, because of this lawsuit, Bleem had effectively ran into some serious financial problems, and that's because the law is expensive, okay? That's just how it works. And that is why you are able to emulate even the Switch to this day, or the PlayStation 3, because emulators by themselves are not illegal, okay? Unless, of course, those emulators start releasing copyrighted materials in their software. Remember when very recently that you had Nintendo take down Dolphin, the emulator from Steam? That's because Nintendo alleged that Dolphin had actually released their decryption keys in their source code. And me, and along other channels like MVG, looked closer into the source code and found that for the longest time, an emulator developer was literally violating the law by releasing actual copyrighted information for the internet to download. So this is why games require BIOS files. For instance, if you want to play PCSX2 games on your system, PlayStation 2 software, you need a BIOS file. Now, most people, I assume, probably just download this for free on the internet. That's not legal. The way that you get it is you actually download dumping tools, run it on an actual PlayStation 2, and dump your region's actual firmware right for you to use. That's pretty much the only legal way to get things done. But again, this brings up some legalities, because very recently, Nintendo actually issued a DMCA against something known as Lockpick RCM. Now, for those of you who don't know what Lockpick RCM is, it's the only way for you to get Switch keys from your actual Nintendo Switch and dump them onto the PC. So for instance, this is a first generation Nintendo Switch. And the reason why I have a first generation Nintendo Switch is no matter what you do to it update-wise, it contains an actual exploit. By ripping off the right Joy-Con and sticking in a little JIT-kick device into this rail, you can actually launch a payload that will allow you to actually dump keys off of your hacked Switch. So again, ladies and gentlemen, the way that this works is because of a hardware exploit left in by NVIDIA, Nintendo cannot patch this, which means they can keep releasing firmware updates and you can keep dumping their keys. But with Nintendo taking down that lockpick RCM, it's basically made it so that that whole aspect is a bit legally questionable, okay? So Nintendo, when they took down lockpick RCM, literally had written why they took it down. They said the Nintendo Switch console and video games contain multiple technological protection measures, and those include that permitting the Nintendo Switch console to interact only with legitimate Nintendo video game files. This process protects Nintendo's copyright-protected video games, including but not limited to those covered, such as Super Mario Maker 2, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Luigi's Mansion 3, and Breath of the Wild, by preventing users from playing pirated copies of the Nintendo video games on the Nintendo Switch console, and by preventing users from unlawfully copying and playing Nintendo's video games on unauthorized devices. Now, this is what led me to another lawsuit to research, and this is Sega v. Accolade. So this screen that you're seeing right here, which is produced by or under license from Sega Genesis Limited, this was known as the TMSS, which for anybody that is into the world of copyright protection, was effectively just the trademark security system for the Sega Mega Drive boards. So the first thing was executed basically when you turned on the console, and you would see this copyright notice, and then execute the currently inserted cartridge. So again, what happened over here was a company known as Accolade at the time had basically reverse engineered and used some of this copyrighted code, which brought about a fair use issue. Now, if you know anything about fair use, it's basically judged on 4 pillars. So the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount of the copyrighted work, the purpose of its use, and the effect of its use on the market. So according to this, what had actually happened from Judge Reinhardt, and basically what was noted by writing the opinion of the court, was that that TMSS file was about 20 to 25 bytes of data, and Accolade's games contained 500 to 1.5 million bytes, which meant that in a grand majority, the overwhelmingly amount, original content was Accolade's, right, and not Sega's TMSS code. Then, of course, what was looked into was the benefit of the public to be able to compete with Sega's licensed games. And again, what was important is that these games, what if they were dissimilar to the actual games being competed with, allegedly? And so the court did not accept the argument that Accolade's games competed directly with Sega, noting that there was no proof that any of Accolade's published games had diminished the market for any of Sega's games. So later on, the court actually noted that Sega code contained some functional elements that were actually not even protected under the Copyright Act of 1976. And so on the matter of reverse engineering, the court concluded where disassembly is the only way to the ideas and functional elements embodied in a copyrighted computer program, and where there is a legitimate reason for seeking such access, disassembly is a fair use of the copyrighted work as a matter of law. So this really made it seem like reverse engineering is, again, totally a legal scenario. If you gotta circumvent copyright protections, I guess according to this case, it may actually be that way. But remember, law like this is created back in the 90s, when there wasn't really that much advancement in the world of computer software, especially compared to the era we live in now. So again, it kind of stark similarity to the actual lockpick RCM takedown, but according to Nintendo there, that was actually circumvention of copyright, which, according to Nintendo, falls under the DMCA law. Now again, for this to matter, it has to go to court and be tested. And again, Nintendo is a massive company, and I doubt anybody is willing to take them on legally. Even another equivalent company in this situation. It's just not worth it. So again, with this kind of up in the air, it brings the idea of backing up or dumping these keys into legal questioning. So what was important at the time when I was researching this was this last portion. Sega v. Accolade helped serve to establish the functional principle of computer software cannot be protected by copyright law. So rather, the only legal protection to such principles can be through holding a patent or by a trade secret. The aspect of the decision has received criticism as well, citing that although the functional principles are not protectable under copyright law, the TMSS code was protectable, and by allowing reverse engineering as fair use, the decision had encouraged the copying of legally protected programs, which is something that I always thought was like kind of what this allowed, legally speaking. But in this situation, going back to Nintendo taking down Lockpick RCM, yeah, maybe that's not how this situation works, ladies and gentlemen, because I looked further into the law itself. Now, because of this DMCA going around and seemingly being untested, it made me look further into the law itself, and this is where it gets even hazier. For instance, on section 117 of copyright law inside over here, this is straight from the government right now, making of an additional copy. For the longest time, I used to say, make a backup, right? Call it a day. It's probably not illegal. Very hazy. So here they've actually written that notwithstanding the provisions of section 106, it is not an infringement for the owner of a copy of a computer program to make or authorize the making of another copy or adaptation of that computer program, provided that such a new copy or adaptation is created as an essential step in the utilization of a computer program in conjunction with the machine and that it is used in no other manner. So I assume this is where we were talking about games being run on emulators, right? Like if you make a copy, it should be running, I guess, with a computer program that I guess can run that backed up version of a game. So 2 here is that such new copy or adaptation is for archival purposes only, and that all archival copies are destroyed in the event that continued possession of a computer program should cease to be rightful. So archival is interesting. I guess execution may be different. I guess according to the law, it seems that you can make a backup if it just literally sits on a hard drive untouched. And I guess maybe the implication is re-implementing that onto another Nintendo Switch cart for use into an actual Switch system, which wouldn't be possible because you can't just create a Nintendo Switch cart without having access to Nintendo Switch's actual game writing software, which is very proprietary and very much at the distribution level, as far as I understand. So even looking further into it, section 103 of the US copyright law in regards to this, no person shall circumvent a technological measure that effectively controls access to a work protected under this title. So in this, they define that to circumvent a technological measure means to descramble a scrambled work, to decrypt an encrypted work, or otherwise avoid, bypass, remove, deactivate, or impair a technological measure without the authority of the copyright owner. And a technological measure effectively controls access to a work if the measure, in the ordinary course of its operation, requires the application of information or a process or a treatment with the authority of the copyright owner to gain access to the work. So because Nintendo has DMCA'd Lockpick RCM, it's made me question if you can even legally dump your games. Because to understand, dumping a Nintendo Switch game requires that you have access to a hacked system, you run actual unauthorized dumping tools in that hacked system, and then you dump your actual Switch cartridge. So even though I technically own this physical cartridge, I guess by dumping it onto an SD card using authorized methods makes that dump technically illegal. And I guess by that definition, it makes every ROM that currently exists for a Switch game technically illegal. So again, Nintendo kind of has put this into limbo because DMCA is a little bit different than actually going to court, right? There's no case law. Me researching this shows you that because there's no actual hard and fast rules, that this needs to go to court in order to be properly tested. If you take Nintendo to court, and again, if the individual does, Nintendo's instantly going to win. But again, if any company takes Nintendo to court, it would be an interesting lawsuit. Because on one hand, you're allowed to have archival copies of your video game. On the other hand, clearly to back up and dump games on certain platforms like the PlayStation 4 or the Nintendo Switch, or a lot of these applications where you need unauthorized dumping tools on these hacked systems, you're basically creating an illegal copy from what I understand every single time. And again, for this to be 100% illegal, this has to go to court. Will it go to court? Probably not. But we're sitting at this weird legal purgatory where now, because of Nintendo's actions, Who knows? Now, on a personal level, I genuinely don't care about big corporations and their grasp on our favorite video games. At the end of the day, if I buy your hardware and I buy your console, I should legally be allowed to back up my games. It should be a legal right. Just like right to repair should be legal. I shouldn't have to go to specific companies or whatever in order to get jacked up repair rates. I should be allowed to repair certain products, or really every product, to the best of my ability. And again, when it comes to the legality of game dumping, I generally don't care even if it is illegal. I get it, all right? And again, I'm making this video because I'm kind of conceding a little bit to the Nintendo fanboys and fangirls who constantly argue about emulation being illegal. And that's because I genuinely care about the law, I care about this hobby, and I just want to be on the right side of it. And again, on a personal level, the right side means I just don't care. So let's get down to dumping actual tools and making sure that it runs on a Steam Deck. Because you know, with the Steam Deck OLED, I ain't playing with the Switch OLED anymore. So ladies and gentlemen, let's get down to actually emulating on a Steam Deck OLED, okay? Let's do it, okay? Let's rip the Band-Aid off and call it a day. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you happen to have Lockpick RCM sitting around, you can run it on a hacked switch to get access to your specific keys. These are your production keys, your actual system keys that you'll be using to run emulators on your Steam Deck. Now, the Steam Deck, being a Linux-based device, might sound like arcane magic to some regular users. But again, with the Steam Deck, like I said at the beginning, you can keep things really simple or you can keep things really complicated. And of course, one of the important things is to basically go to desktop mode, set it up real quick, and go to something known as Emudeck. Now, this is quite possibly one of the easiest ways to set up emulation that I've ever seen, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Steam Deck is such a popular device. The more popular devices get, the easier these situations become. So all you really have to do is make sure you have an SD card, just because managing files is a little bit easier when you have external memory, but again, internal is fine. All you need to do is download Emudeck from the actual site, and here they give you a bunch of options so you can get regular Linux. I think they have a Windows version coming by, which it's kind of hilarious when Linux comes before Windows, but I ain't gonna knock that. You've got Chimera OS, which is another fork to work with. But here we're going to download the SteamOS version. This gives you a .desktop script, which you copy, again, to your desktop from your download folder. You run this and basically follow the on-screen directions. So downloading Emudeck is as simple as basically going through this installation wizard, picking which emulators you want, and again, just download the ones you need. I don't play arcade games, so I made sure MAME was left unchecked. And then, of course, go to Next. It'll launch the script and download everything from the Flatpak store. So file placement is pretty easy. Depending on where you've actually stored your games and BIOS files, you basically have to go to that specific drive, go to the emulation folder that's generated, and in the BIOS folder, you can place BIOS files for your PlayStation 2 games, your GameCube systems, whatever. It all corresponds to its specific folders. Same for ROMs. If you want to copy your ROMs, for instance, your Super Nintendo ROMs, over to the Super Nintendo folder, then everything's placed over there. It's actually that simple. Now, what's even more wilder is if you enable the Steam ROM Manager, which runs initially under Emudeck, you can basically just kill off Steam to begin with, because you can't have Steam enabled while you're doing this magic. It'll basically look through those folders, your ROMs, where you place your ROM files in, and it'll basically generate a list of ROMs that it recognizes. It'll download cover art for all of those ROMs, and by hitting one button, you can implement them into your Steam directory. So meaning that when you're in gaming mode and not in desktop mode, you can go to the Collections tab and basically see that your games are placed in neat collections. So PlayStation 2 games are in the PlayStation 2 tab, GameCube in the GameCube tab, Wii U in the Wii U tab. Now, because of legal reasons, I'm going to show you games from game developers that honestly don't really get, basically anybody but Nintendo. I'm not trying to get sued here. So again, Nintendo games look great. I've been playing Wind Waker on the Steam OLED, and let me tell you, those colors pop like a madman. But again, playing games like Grand Theft Auto, Bully, Silent Hill 2, a lot of these classic PlayStation 2 titles and Super Nintendo titles, you know, where that art style really pops on a colorful screen, is exactly how you want to be doing the Steam Deck justice. Now, of course, the Steam Deck can run some of the most recent systems, like you can play some PlayStation 3 games on here, but I wouldn't recommend it, just because it's not powerful enough. Look, even with some of the revisions to the OLED, it's not powerful enough, in my opinion, to run a lot of those PlayStation 3 games at playable speeds. Some really simple games will work, but generally it's not really an emulator I feel like going down on. You may need to wait for future revisions of this hardware to come out on. But PlayStation 2, everything works great. Nintendo Switch stuff works really well. I've been playing Tears of the Kingdom pretty much on my Steam Deck and PC. And the way that it works on the Steam Deck is, again, if you have those production, or sorry, not those system files that you dumped from your actual legitimate Switch, you can place them onto the Steam Deck and basically get a pretty good Switch emulation experience. Now, for some games, like Tears of the Kingdom, I find that turning down the resolution is probably the way to go. A little bit, but generally the games look and feel pretty fine. But there's a real benefit to playing a game this way. For instance, one of the best part about the Steam Deck is something known as Decky tools. So there are two tools in particular that I want to talk about. One of them is basically if you go to GitHub, you download Decky tools, install a script, much the same way you did with Emudeck. In gaming mode, you can basically hit the quick menu button and go down to this little plug icon. This plug icon has a little store that you tap, and you can download things like Power Tools, which allows you to turn off SMT, which is simultaneous hyperthreading. And what that does is basically limit the amount of threads on your system and gives a little bit more clock speed, so Switch games run just a little bit better. So if you're not hitting that 30 frames per second, by turning off SMT, you probably will hit the 30 frames, and in some cases, you'll hit that 60 frames for games like Super Mario Odyssey. Maybe even for Super Mario Wonder. Hell, you might even be able to play some Super Mario RPG, but you didn't hear that shit from me. Switch games that do work on this that I can talk about are games like Shin Megami Tensei 5, which has been locked to Switch but runs beautifully on the Steam Deck, especially the OLED. Games like Red Dead Redemption 1 run really well under the Switch emulator on the OLED. So yes, you can in fact play Red Dead 1 and Red Dead 2 portably on a Steam platform. And again, if I am pissing off Nintendo, and legally I'm not in the right, ethically, I should be allowed to do what I want with the games that I goddamn own, okay? This is, in some way, civil disobedience from me. But again, ladies and gentlemen, in beyond these games and these emulators, there is also another tool that I love. It's called SyncThing. So SyncThing is a beautiful piece of technology, and if you get it set up on your system, your home computer, and your Steam Deck, you can basically create cross-saves between your emulators. So when I was talking about Tears of the Kingdom earlier, you can play Tears of the Kingdom on your Steam Deck. Yeah, it won't look as smooth on your main PC, but you can play an hour of it and then instantly cross-sync that save data back to your home computer and continue playing it on your beefier gaming rig at home. So if you have a powerful enough rig to play Tears of the Kingdom at 4K, 60 frames per second, which isn't that hard to do, you can play through a chunk of it on your main system, and if you're going away for a couple days, like I do from time to time, copy that save file to your Steam Deck and just continue playing it on the way. It's that kind of stuff that I love seeing from the emulation community. You gotta pay Nintendo to do cloud save backups, okay? You can do it for free on a Linux system, all right, that you own. This is hardware that belongs to you. And ladies and gentlemen, emulation, again, to tie it all back to it, to not make this a massive guide on how to piss off Nintendo with the Steam Deck, emulation is a protected right underneath the law as it stands. However, the topic of dumping your own games has kind of become a shocking thing for me. Look, ladies and gentlemen, back in the day, I used to watch a lot of videos of people making portable PlayStation 2 systems. And this is where they would gut the internals of a PS2 and stick it into this form factor just so you could carry around legitimate hardware anywhere you go. Nowadays, you could just buy an Android device off of Amazon and emulate PS2 games with relative ease. But see, compared to emulating, what you're seeing over here is actual games being run without violating that copyright protection. Nothing is being dumped in this situation. However, when it comes to game dumping itself, I think with how Nintendo and a lot of gaming companies now are starting to encroach again on it, it may be illegal to dump your video games, but it will be legal to actually emulate, which produces a catch-22 situation. Yeah, you can emulate games, but if you can't dump them officially, then what is the point of having an emulator when you've got no actual games you feasibly want to run be legal in the process? Honestly, copyright law, I've learned from this entire video and researching it, is it's such a fucking convoluted mess that honestly, we need to get some of these goddamn politicians that we have put in power rewriting these laws to match up to nowadays, okay? To the current standards that we live in. Look, back in the 90s, computers, gaming software was wholly different. Nowadays, game ownership, software ownership is such a goddamn hassle that dealing with circumventing copyright, dealing with digital rights management are nightmares on its own. And I think the copyright law as we currently have it needs to be updated to kind of reflect that. And the thing that's scary about it is if it does get reflected, would game companies, would a lot of these big publishers, these big game hardware manufacturers start the war again to make one of our favorite hobbies possibly illegal for good in the future? Look, in no normal world does Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo ever want emulation, unless it's for them. If they're selling you emulated versions on their storefronts, that's good, that's money in their pocket. But if we live in a world where you can have a flagship Switch title like Super Mario RPG playable before it comes out on actual emulated software, that's scary for Nintendo, obviously, from a business perspective, from a legal perspective. If they, in a perfect world, could shut down the emulators that we take for granted, they would. But again, we're getting into a point recently with some of this legal action where the emulators are legal, but are the games we are running on them legal? I'm going to leave that for you to question. But hey, for now, if you want to get the Steam Deck OLED and basically turn this into a handheld emulation godsend, then this was a video that kind of taught you how you can do that. So do with the information as you will. But again, ladies and gentlemen, keep it legal, okay? No need to go to jail for emulating, all right? Those prisoners are scary enough. Trust me, if you tell them you went to jail for emulating, you might be king of the goddamn yard. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Emudeck, and if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.